Good morning, boys and girls. It's Charlie Craven, and I am back today, finally, to tie another little fly tutorial. And this one is a fly called a profile spinner or a guide winner spinner, depending on who you're getting it from. But basically, it is a spinner, Mayfly spinner pattern, with a parachute post that makes it a heck of a lot easier to see. I used this fly on the Rio Grande this year for gray drakes. Which is exactly the same thing as what I've got here, except much bigger and gray colored. And it was a fantastic fly. Sits low in the water, still very easy to see, and it floats really well, which is sort of a liability of most spinner patterns. So I've become a fan of this, so I've been tying some up. And if you're going to do it on a big size, you've probably got to use a turkey biot. If you get a gray drake is a size 10 or a 12. And you're probably going to need to use a turkey biot, and I tie those rib up for the body on those guys. But I'm going to tie you at like a size 14 rusty spinner, just because that's maybe a little bit more appropriate for most of your fishing. Rusty spinners are what most mayflies turn into, and a size 14 is none too big. Some of them are as big as a 12. You see those bugs kind of flitting around in the summer. Up in the air in the evening, and this is what the fish are eating. So this is a variation on a rusty spinner with the parachute post, but it's got some little tricks to tying it that are not terribly intuitive, I must say. So I'm going to try to show you some of those. So I'm going to peel that one out of the vise here, and I'm going to put a Tiemco 100 SPBL size 14 back in the vise, and I've got some Veevus 14-aught, just rusty brown here. And I'm going to start this thread just up here about 80%. I'm going to wrap a nice smooth thread base back to the bend, trying to keep everything flat and smooth and wraps butted, and you want to make sure you're all the way back to the bend of the hook. Now at this point I'm going to take, on a big fly like this, I'm going to use 4 microfibrils or tailing fibers, synthetic tailing fibers here for the tail, but I'm going to use 4, and I'm going to split 2 to each side, just gives it a little bit more support and holds that tail end up. So what I want to do is get 4 of these separated. And I try to keep them as even as I can. And then spinners typically have a fairly long tail, relative to the dun. This is the adult, the final stage. The imago stage of the mayfly, so fairly long tail. So a shank and a half. I don't like to go too much longer than that, just because these tails are stiff, and if you get a fish that comes up to eat it on a real bug, those tails will collapse. But on these on an artificial fly, these tail fibers are stiff, so they don't collapse. And if you make the fly too big, it could actually push out of their mouth. So shank and a half or so is what my measurement is. I'm going to set these at the bend and catch them with 3 or 4 turns, just one right in front of the other. And then I lift all 4 of those fibers up and kind of splay them out a bit. You can take your thumbnail underneath them to do the same thing. And all I'm trying to do there is get them separated. And ultimately what I want are 2 to a side, like so. So then I'm going to pick my thread up here. So I'm 4 wraps. I think I just made an extra wrap. 4 wraps forward of the tail. So I'm going to come on my near side. I'm going to come at a long angle here, back behind the near side tails, and pull forward and make a wrap around the hook. Then I'm going to take this thread at a long angle down between the other side tails and then lock those wraps down. And you can sort of kind of tweak these in position, but see how you get a nice split tail, just figure eighting that thread. Nice wide split tail. Get a little better view of it there. And I'm going to wrap forward over those butt ends. Again, I try to keep the thread as flat and even as I can here. Right back up to my starting point, and then I'll trim those butt ends out. And at that point I'm going to use a Goose Biot, and this is a Canada Goose Biot. This is a natural Canada Goose Biot that I dyed rusty brown. These are not commercially available. They're easy to dye if you've got Canada geese. If not, you can use just a regular store-bought Goose Biot, which will not have the dark edge that this feather will have. Store-bought Goose Biots are from domestic geese, which are white, and they'll still have a nice ribbed effect, but they don't have that black edge like this has. So I'm going to bump that thread all the way back to the bend. I'm going to tie this biot in for a smooth body. I tie left-handed, keep in mind. This is a biot stem from a right wing. So left-handed tying, right wing. Right-handed tying, left wing for the smooth body. So I'm going to tie this in by the tip. I'm going to wrap forward over that tip. And I'm not really trying to build any taper. I want you to kind of note that that body is not tapered at this moment. There's no taper there. And I'm going to pick up my Zap A Gap, and I've got my brush trimmed down nice and thin. I'm just going to put a little thin layer of Zap A Gap top and bottom on the hook here. Make sure you get it all the way around. Just a little thin layer. And then I'll grab the end of this biot in my Hackle pliers. And because somebody always asks, these are Jorgensen Hackle tweezers. I think these are the best pliers going, particularly for biots. But I'm going to start to wrap this forward, and you can see that stand-up edge is on the front of the turn, and I'm using the back edge of the turn to cover that stand-up edge. So your wraps become a little bit more spread as you work forward. And when I get to the end of the biot, tying a 14 with a Goose biot is asking a lot of it. So you're not going to get much there. And then I'm going to wrap down over the butt ends, and I actually like to smooth that off a bit, kind of taper up to it, and smooth that thorax area off before I put the wing in. Like so. And you can see we've got just that beautiful ribbed body. That's hard to argue with. So now the trick for the wing. What I like to use for the wing is polypropylene macrame yarn, and this is silver colored, is what I'm going to use for the spent wing part of this fly. And I've just taken a fairly sparse strand, relative to a size 14 fly, fairly sparse strand, and I've brushed that out. You absolutely could use white also. And then for the parachute, I'm going to use some hot pink. Now, I still have some hot pink in my personal stash. I can't get the hot pink macrame yarn anymore. So what I've been recommending is use some hot pink Cerise colored Mcflylon here. Same material, a little bit more expensive, but it comes in that bright color. And again, you can make this post whatever color you want it to be. If you can see a different color better, by all means do that. But I like that hot pink. It makes it easy to see. So I'm going to take my first strand, I'm going to bump this thread just in front of that body tie off. And I'm going to take the silver strand and I'm going to tie it in with X wraps. And I want to make sure that these wraps are good and tight. Couple each way, couple the other way to anchor those down. Good and tight like so. And I kind of like to twist those ends together. Might even put a little... I just wash my hands for the video so they're all nice and clean. A little dubbing wax on your fingertips will help you get a hold of that. So I just tied those in like standard spinner wings, nothing fancy there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of pink, I'm going to lay it right on top of there, and I'm going to tie it in the same way right on top of that first wing. And again, you want to make sure that that's anchored tightly. Now typically I should have done this ahead of time, try to tie that pink strand in just a little shorter than the gray strand. It'll just make it easier to keep them separated. And then I'm going to bump my thread forward here. I'm going to pull my two gray wings down and my pink wing up. Now what I'll do here is I'm going to pick up my thread, I'm going to come around the base of the pink wing, holding those two ends together. And I'm just going to I'm not really posting yet, I'm just getting a few turns there to anchor that in place, and then I'll take a turn around the hook. So you can see we've got now our parachute post standing upright and our spinner wings laying out 90 degrees to the hook shank. So now we're going to take a hackle feather, and I've kind of gone back and forth on what color hackle feather to use here, and there's a couple different schools of thought. You can use hackle that would match the legs of the insect, which in this case would be sort of a brownish red color. Or you could use hackle that would match the color of the wing, which would be a white or a light dun, maybe a badger, and sort of let that blend into the wing a little bit more. I like the brown. And what I do is I try to find let's see how to show this to you here. Try to find a feather that's, you know, almost 2 hook gaps. The fibers are almost 2 hook gaps. Can you see that a little better there? So fairly long, maybe oversized hackle. And I'm going to strip some of the butt end. And really from here, we're just going to create a parachute. So I'm going to bump this thread in front of the wing, and I'm going to tie that stem right to the hook shank, just behind the hook eye. Kind of draw that down to length. And then I can wrap over it right up to the base of the wing. Then I'll stand it up. And now I'll start to post. And you can see I could sweep those 2 spent wings down. And I'm going to post up the wing. And you want to give yourself enough room. You can kind of tie these a couple different ways. For those gray drakes, we were fishing fairly heavy water and having fairly good fishing, so catching a lot of fish. So I wanted a fly that was a little bit more hackled, so I made a longer post and put a few more turns on there. If you're tying this for a trico on flat water, you might just need a couple of turns of hackle. You may not need as much. So how many turns of hackle you're going to allow for will depend a little bit on what your intention is and where you're going to fish it. So now I've got my hackle posted to the top of the wing post. I've got a little bare stem beyond my tie down, just like a typical parachute. And then I'm going to take a little bit of rusty brown superfine dubbing here. I'm going to put this on my thread, and I want a nice thin strand. One of the things on dubbing the thorax on these spinners is you've got to kind of work back and forth a bit to round out and shape the thorax. So you want a thin strand, fairly long relative to the size of the fly, but fairly long. But you want to make sure that you have enough to build a thorax from the front edge of the abdomen up to the back of the wings. You can see I'm kind of working this right up and sort of tapering it up to the wings. And then I'm going to come under and cross around. And you're just doing figure 8. You're just doing it on either side of that wing post. So you're rounding out the bottom of the thorax. Then I'll cross over, come right up to the hook eye, dub right back to the front of the wing, and magically, like I've done this before, I'm going to run out of dubbing right where I need to. Now what I want to do here is I run out of dubbing, is I want to end with my thread going around the base of that wing. And in my case, tying left-handed, I like that wing post to those wraps there on the wing post to go clockwise. If you tie right-handed, you want them to go counterclockwise. So now I'm going to stand that up a little bit. I've got my super glue handy here, so I'm going to take and put just a little bit of glue on the base of that post. Then I'll grab my handy dandy spinning hackle pliers here. I'll separate out these wing fibers. So my thread's hanging at the base of that wing post. And I'm going to start this hackle at the top of the post and put 1 turn under the last, 3 or 4 turns. I'm going to pick my thread up on the far side and go clockwise, again, just like the hackle. 2 or 3 turns. I'm going to push the thread down over the hook eye, come around and down again. Hopefully I didn't catch too much there. I don't think I did. And then I can trim my feather out nice and flush. I'm going to check and make sure I didn't catch any extra hackle fibers there. Now one thing you can do with a parachute is if you grab your parachute post, you can kind of pull it back and that'll clear the way at the hook eye a little bit, so it makes it a little easier to get your whip finish in there. So I'm going to set up my whip finisher, and I'm just going to sweep everything up and back, except for that one strand of hackle right there that I meant to catch because I felt like it was too much. I think we had exactly 1 hackle fiber too much hackle on that fly, so I left that one in. Then I'm going to stand everything back up, sort of check our look. I'm going to trim that parachute wing fairly short. I don't want a really tall wing. This wing is really just for you. And when you cut it short like that, you get a nice pronounced, very opaque post that's easy to see. And then one thing I like to do here before I trim the wings is I'll take my dubbing brush. This is a Tiemco retractable dubbing brush, but I like to brush this yarn out for the wings so that I have it sort of all untangled. If you just pull it out and cut it, they're very often they're crossing each other. Those fibers in the strand are crossing each other, and you don't get quite the wing shape that you're hoping for. And I'll pull those both up, try to keep them flat, and I'm going to trim just a little bit longer than a hook shank length. And you can cut straight across. Absolutely, I've done it a million times. I like to kind of pull them forward at an angle and cut. And that gives me a little bit of a tapered wing shape there, a little bit more reminiscent of an actual mayfly. But you can see from the bottom, let me turn this a bit, and then I'll get you your focus back. From the bottom, we've got a really nice little spinner pattern. And from the top, we've got a really nice little parachute pattern that makes it easy for you to see. And that is one of the things you always fight with on spinners, is they're just so darn hard to see. Max and I went out the other day with Russ Miller from Umpqua, and we fished a trico hatch, and little tiny flies, they just get hard to see, hard to find sometimes, especially if you get a little wind mixed into the batch. So having a parachute post on top of your spinner makes that much easier. Rusty spinners typically fall in the evening time, so you've got low light as well. So anything that can make that fly a little easier to see. Let me get that back in view there. Sharpen your eyeballs up. There we go. And that is our profile spinner. The profile spinner is from Mike Mercer. The Guide Winna spinner, I think, is a knockoff of Mike Mercer's pattern, which is not surprising because there's a lot of companies just knocking stuff off these days, which is a whole other subject that I should probably do some sort of diatribe on. But the truth of the matter is Mike Mercer's an awfully good fly designer, and when you're a good fly designer, people knock you off, but you can't argue with a good idea, and Mike Mercer had an awfully good idea here. So there it is. Profile spinner. Rusty brown version, tied in trico, tied in gray drake, tied in whatever color spinner you need. Turkey biot, goose biot, lots of variations. Shoot, you could do thread. Honestly, their spinners are pretty skinny little bugs, so thread will work just fine for these. Any variation on that theme. But you should twist some of these up and have them in your box, so when you see those fish rising right at dark as the sun goes down and you can't see what they're eating, it's usually a spinner, and you've got some fly to fish to them and something to get you in the game. Don't make me tell you twice. Tie up some spinners, put them in your box, fish them in the evening during the summer. There you go. Thanks for watching, you guys. I'm Charlie Craven. If you need anything, charlieslybox.com has all of it. And even if you don't need anything, you should go to charlieslybox.com, because we probably have something that you think you don't need that you do need, or you at least want. Shoot, we got all kinds of stuff I want. There you go. You guys take care.